Okay.
So Gen Xers, born between 61 and 81-ish.
By the way, I grabbed the
roughly.
book when we were asking.
Yeah.
Boomers,
Was I right?
Boomers, according to generational theory, is 43 to 60. And Gen Xers would be 61 to 81.
Oh, good.
All
61 to 81 for Gen X.
And while you jest and say the best of the generations, it sounds like Christian's coming for us. So
I know.
Yeah.
He already has.
Coming in
I know
hot.
it's coming. That's why I had to say it.
Well, it's really interesting. We had a lot of conversation about Gen X, obviously, because you have a lot of representation here. And, I ain't scared. I'm coming at you.
I'm ready.
But, Gen X, you think of the nomad. You think of the nomad wandering the desert. You think of all of the entertainment that is relative to nomads, or at least I think of Blade Runner. I think of Mad Max. I think of the lone cyborg wandering the desert, trying to figure out how to survive or try to, the reluctant anti-hero.
The Last of Us.
The Last of Us.
Neo in the Matrix.
Neo
right?
in the Matrix. The one, right? There's
Yeah.
a specialness or there's a disregard, like can be sometimes at either end of the extreme. But either way, with Gen X, you have to make your life happen. Your parents have gone off and done other things typically, or you've entered into a situation where you're like wandering the Wild West and you have to figure out how to make life work. At least that's the ethos that's been generated amongst Gen X and each other. So the nomad idea is, I call it a meritocracy, or you could say capitalism, but it's like an embracing of that idea. It's embracing of, I need to make my life happen. I need to gather my own riches. I need to go find my own life. I need to go build my own life. It's like RoboCop needing to assemble all the little parts of me to make myself whole, and piecing together technology, needing to, make your own VCR thing out of, spare parts. It's that kind of ethos.
I think a perfect representation, a visceral representation of Gen X ethos is Burning Man, in that there's a desert, and in a week, a bunch of people come together, they construct an entire city, and then at the end of the week, they dismantle it, and it's back to desert.
Right.
And that one of their core values is radical self-reliance. And they're in some of the harshest climate on the planet, on the playa, in the middle of summer in Nevada, and it's extreme temperatures, no water, and yet they just make it work. And it's all about expression and art, individualism, radical self-reliance.
Right.
And I think that's a really interesting view of what Gen X kind of stands for in a lot of ways.
And there's a hierarchy. There's a strength. There's like, if you're dealing with other people in the wilderness, you need to be stronger than them or you will get taken out.
Yeah.
Right. So there is this live by the sword, die by the sword kind of energy. This, you're not wandering from house to house with absolute trust in anybody. If anything, there's a lack of trust typically. So trust is hard to come by. And usually who you trust is someone who is also putting in as much effort as you are, right? Which is why I think that while there's this meritocracy persona for Gen X, I think there is a sort of community or even communism. I know that might be a little triggering to even use that word.
What?
Shadow for Gen X. By communism, I mean specifically a hierarchy of meritocracy, meaning that I put in the work and then I find talented people to work with me, right? It's not an open egalitarian socialism, spread the wealth to everybody kind of feeling. It is I put in the work, I earned this, I made it happen, but I also want to be helpful. I want to give to the people who are also putting in the effort and putting in the work. And so it's very different than some of these other types of community, but it's like community created of individuals who are putting in the effort, who are also cobbling parts together and making things work. And there's a certain respect, and respect can equal trust and honor.
So with communism, you've got a single authority that then redistributes the wealth, right? And what I hear you saying is that the shadow is that Gen Xers want to have the wealth come to them, but
resource. We could also use the word resource.
Resource, right? Exactly. Yeah. But then they actually tend to start redistributing it, whether they're aware of it or not.
Yeah, and we'll talk later about millennials and the perception of Gen X Gen X is starting to come online in a bigger way. Like you guys kind of disappeared for a while at scale, right? And Gen X is starting to step into leadership, like you mentioned on previous podcasts. And that leadership style is very contradictive to millennial expectations and younger expectations, which we'll get into. So, but it's really embracing hierarchy. And that's why I mentioned defensive triggers and growth triggers, because there are really two different types of hierarchies. There are growth hierarchies and dominator hierarchies. And if a Gen Xer is going to embrace their shadow, it's embracing a growth hierarchy. It's creating systems that nurture growth and development. And then those systems themselves, like Personality Hacker, who has people that work within our system that are doing great work, we have systems effect on people who are our students, and they have effects on people. And there's actually really great positive work that comes from that, whereas perception might be otherwise.
I'm extremely attracted to the idea. The idea of working with a group of people of like minds toward a common goal. And the moment I say that, I'm deeply just trustful that can happen. Like, I want it, but I'm like, it's probably not somebody's not going to pull their weight, or there's going to be infighting. Or I was part of a religious background, so I've seen church split after church split and infighting in churches and community groups. I was like, I couldn't be less interested in all that BS that would come with that. But man, there is something appealing about collective action, not activism or anything like that, but like literally getting together and creating a project together, like we're doing here at Personality Hacker. Clearly we're gathering people and we're organizing and we're producing things, and that is extremely appealing. But there's a little nervousness around the idea that, I don't know, that communism idea coming into it.
Yeah, because it's you're wanting, or maybe not fully aware that that's what you're wanting to. Maybe there's this feeling, maybe it's cognitive function wise, that you want to serve people, you want to be someone that is doing something big for the world, but the way you want to do it may be necessarily what is repressed. This idea of like, actually what I really want to do is find talented people, put them in these proper positions, and really own that that's what I want. And maybe get out of this realm, which is part of the advice I can get into, is get out of the realm of looking at people who are not doing enough, or not doing enough, but like not putting in the work, not putting in the effort, not learning, not being willing to get their hands dirty. Yeah. Like Gen Xers love people who love to get their hands dirty. Right? Yeah. You know, and championing those people versus talking down to people who are not willing to step up.
Well, I think it's like it's daring to be optimistic, because there does tend to be, I mean, I find myself doing it, even though I'm like a naturally optimistic person. I absolutely find myself focusing on like where people have failed me, or where it's more like where people are not capable or competent. Yeah. It's like, why is everybody so incompetent? It's like you and I will find ourselves on these like little bitch fests where we're just like, oh, can't get the order right. Nobody can do anything. Why are they closing 10 minutes early? Like it's your job to stay open until that time, not just you just decided to close early. Like, man, we just get these. Everybody's so incompetent, super judgy.
Everyone sucks at their job.
Everybody sucks at their job.
If I was doing this, I'd do it so much better.
And so it's a lack of trust, and it's actually the opposite of the hyper trust in the system. It's a complete total distrust in the system. It's like the system will never, like, you can't trust the system. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, with boomers, it was a time period where there was a high demand for order and a high supply of order. You guys grew up in a time period where there was high demand for order, but low supply of order. And then in the 90s in particular, like, you know, both were just falling apart. Everything was starting to unravel.
Well, and Strauss and Howe basically talk about how, not us, we were too young. I mean, I wasn't even born yet, but there's a lot of Gen Xers that watched the sitting president resign on national television.
Yeah, distrust.
So it's just a distrust of systems. And that idea of a more communal way of seeing things, like the shadow of it is actually, we kind of want everybody to get together. You know, it's really interesting to watch the show Stranger Things, which is about a bunch of Gen X kids, honestly, younger and older Gen X kids. And they're always running around in packs, right? They're like these little packs of kids on bikes, these little packs of teenagers in cars.
They're not lone wolves.
They're not lone wolves. Yeah, exactly. And it feels very true. It also feels like they're getting things done and they're like making it happen and they're solving these. I mean, obviously
they can't trust the system to solve it. The cops, they have to do it themselves.
But they know that each one is capable of figuring stuff out.
That's right.
Each have their own skill.
Yeah. And they'll jump in after each other and like go to, and so there's that sense of like wanting that community so bad,
right?
But just not trusting that anybody's going to be capable of doing it.
Right. And so with boomers, you've got this individualism that has this collective shadow with Gen Gen X, you've got this individualism that has a collective shadow. And again, it's just the shadow of recognizing that that exists. You want to work with other people. You want to work with people that are doing good work and who are adaptable.
Well, and there's that cynicism can be overcome because I think, and it almost sounds like the shadow of Gen X is all positive, but the truth is that Gen Xers, it's like we have this attitude about being ignored. And we're like, fine, we'll ignore you then.
Right.
Like there's just, it almost comes from like hurt.
Yeah.
You can feel like it comes from collective hurt.
Yeah.
But it's a being willing to just throw everything away.
Yeah.
And because we grew up in sort of a harsh context with each other, it was very dog eat dog growing up. There's also a sense of,
Grit.
yeah, there's a sense of grit and a willingness to do what it takes. It's not creative in an artistic way, but it's a creative in like just make it happen way.
Yeah.
And I think that energy is really needed right now. But Xers just kind of go, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's almost like the part of the shadow is that you feel so responsible to make things happen. You actually end up not taking responsibility for something bigger that you could actually impact for the better.
Right.
It's a lack of responsibility, even though this is actually a fairly personally responsible generation.
And maybe sometimes actually letting yourself be at the top of the pile, like at the top of the hierarchy, to let yourself take the credit for all the work that you've done and do the redistribution of the wealth that way, or resources to the people that are filling that role of being competent.